Hey everyone! In this video, I'm going to go over making two components of at-home screen printing. The first thing is making a homemade screen. The second thing is an exposure unit. I had a lot of difficulty finding directions online on how to build these two things. And so I wanted to first start out this video series with creating these two components that are very necessary to screen printing at home. Let's get started. The first screen we made used 1x3 boards, and later we found out that the boards were too flat when we needed to nail them together, and they were also a little too wide, making the screen bulkier than it needed to be. However, I did continue to use this screen as a sample in future videos. The second screen we made used 2x2 boards, and they worked much better overall. The screen was rather large. I needed it to be 25 by 36, and that's because I'm printing on fabric. The boards required a lot of sanding, and we made sure to do a thorough job just so it wouldn't snag the screen or the fabric at any time during the printing process. To attach the wood pieces together, we used 2 screws at each intersection that we pre-drilled the holes for. This was to ensure that the wood wouldn't split when we were actually screwing in the screws. We also used a little wood glue just to make sure everything stuck together. The screen does have quite a bit of wobble, and that's due to imperfections in the boards. The next part of the screen building process was to actually staple the mesh onto the wooden frame. The mesh I'm using is 140M, and this is because I'm using water-based ink. And I'm printing on fabric. So this was on the lower end of the recommended mesh size. And I actually think for my next print, I'm going to try and get 150M mesh and try that out. If you're using plastisol inks or printing on paper, your mesh size will differ from the recommended range that I'm using. The last step in the screen building process was to cut a piece of foam that fits inside the edge of the frame. And this is for when we're actually burning the image onto the screen, so the screen doesn't sag. Every video I saw on this process included covering the foam with black fabric, so I just simply pinned fabric over the foam. Now on to the second part of this video, building the PVC exposure unit. To determine the length of the bottom legs of the exposure unit, I'm taking the width of my screen, which is 25 inches, and adding 3 inches so the entire screen can rest on the exposure unit. To determine how far apart the bottom legs will be, I took my smallest screen and put that on top of the PVC, just to make sure that the entire frame could sit on the PVC and not be at an angle when I'm exposing it. A 500 watt halogen light is what's actually going to be doing the exposing. This has a handle of 6 inches, so that determines how far apart the frames supporting the light can be at a minimum. To get 6 inches apart, I need to cut the PVC at 7 inches because of how the pieces fit into the T-pieces. I cut the remainder of the bottom pieces of the base by subtracting what I already had laid out, making sure to account for the extra space the PVC pipes need to go inside the elbows and T-pieces. I'll also have all of my supplies listed in the description below. I needed to decide how high I wanted the halogen light to sit, and I honestly just guessed and used 30 inches of PVC because I figured it would be better to trim it later than to have to cut a larger new piece of PVC to make the unit taller. This is the part of the exposure unit where the halogen light will actually hang. I wanted the halogen light to be in the center of my screen, and since my screen is 25 inches, I had already explained that I made the base of the PVC exposure unit 28 inches just so I'd have extra room, meaning I wanted my light to be 14 inches from the edge of my PVC exposure unit. As a side note, because I made the exposure unit so tall and the PVC we're using is only 3/4 inch in diameter, we did need to use PVC glue to make sure the whole unit didn't fold over once the halogen light was actually attached. Another thing was the U-bolts we used to attach the halogen light to the PVC unit needed to be bent because they weren't quite wide enough to fit over the PVC. The last thing we needed to do on this exposure unit was to remove the glass on the halogen light. The plastic frame needed to be bent a little bit to wiggle the glass free, but once it was out, we simply just reattached the black frame with the screw and we were ready to go. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you learned a lot about making your own screen at home as well as your own exposure unit. The next video in the series, I'm going to cover coating your screen in emulsion and then exposing it. If you like this video, please ring the bell to be notified when my next video is released, as well as subscribing. Thank you.